All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining for our next breakout session. We're really excited. This is on the top 10 ways to fail at analytics in machine learning. And I'd like to introduce our speaker, Brian Sampsel. He's the VP of AI and Automation at Covail. So I'll let you take it from here, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Shelby. Hey, while I'm getting started, if everyone could do me a favor, I'd love to know just a little bit about the audience here. If you could just type in the chat real quick what your role is, that would be awesome to help me know who the audience is here. So thanks for joining me here on how to fail at analytics. So I've been doing data and analytics for over 15 years now, which is hard to believe. And have been fortunate to hit a pretty wide variety in there. So everything from customer insights to looking at e-commerce and web traffic data to machine learning and primary research. And I've been fortunate enough to spend time on both the client side, right? So leading analytics teams inside organizations, as well as on the consulting side. So working with companies that you've heard of like Coca-Cola and Home Depot and Nationwide Insurance, among others. And so I ran across this quote a while back from Warren Buffett. He's a pretty smart guy. So whenever he says something, I like to listen, but he says, it's good to learn from your mistakes. It's better to learn from other people's mistakes. So I think analytics and statistics and AI are extremely, extremely powerful tools when used correctly. And, I love helping people use them correctly and do it well. And I have made my fair share of mistakes over the years. So my hope today is you can learn from my mistakes and just pick up one or two techniques that you can go and apply when you go back to your jobs after the conference and do things a little bit better. So we'll spend just a minute or two on each one. It'll be quick, but hopefully you'll be able to take one or two things away. I ran across this quote recently too, just kind of another take on the Warren Buffett quote by Dizzy Gillespie, who's a jazz artist. It's taken me all my life to learn what not to play, in case the world of music resonates with you a little bit more. And then lastly, just before we get started, who is this for, right? When I was pulling this talk together, I really picture this is for analytics professionals, data scientists who are working in large, complex organizations and trying to do analytics with a variety of other stakeholders, right? And I'm assuming the stakeholders you're dealing with have a variety of experience with and comfort with analytics. So there's probably some advice in here that's not great if you're entering a data visualization contest. It might not be great for sharing at a meetup or participating in a Kaggle competition. This is really meant for those people in large organizations trying to do analytics well. So first one, assume the requester knows exactly what they want. I think oftentimes we as analytics professionals get asked for things and the request may come across very confidently. It may sound very clear. It likely sounds like the person you're working with knows exactly what they're looking for. And the truth is, more than not, they need help thinking through it. This is a mistake I made a lot early in my career. It's kind of one of the first big lessons I learned. This happened time and time again. I'd get a request, I'd go away for some time, do work, come back a week or two later and say, hey, look what I got here. It's exactly what you were looking for. I was so proud of myself. And then I'd hear reactions very quick of, oh, that's great. But what I really need is over here. And I'm thinking in my head, well, that's not what you said at all, right? And even today, it's still hard to not remember this. But so advice here is take an iterative approach to these things. Don't go away for a long period of time and work in isolation. Take a very iterative approach, work with the requester, show them things very early on, and know that as they see data, as they see insights, it's going to actually shape the request, right? And the other thing I'd advocate too is learn to be an expert at asking questions, right? And probing at the requests. I think that's going to serve you very, very well. Second way, don't explore the data before you build a model. So this is actually a chart I picked up this book a few years ago. It's called something like how to do math with bad graphics, something like that. But what I found time and time again is the people that are providing you data often don't fully understand it. And so you need to spend time doing your own understanding of the data before you jump into the analytics or before you jump into the modeling effort, right? I love this chart because, as we know, as we've all heard, right, you can draw a line through anything, right? It doesn't mean that line is actually useful here, right? You can imagine a line going between the dots on the bottom left and the dots on the upper right, right? That'll fit. It'll be probably a highly accurate line, won't be actually very useful. You know, we just finished up a project recently where we were building a classifier. And it was basically, it was a binary classifier. And as we were scoping the project out, it kind of passed all the initial, you know, gates. It made sense. And as we started to actually get the data and look at it, you could just tell by visualizing the data that there was no signal there, right? You could tell there was nothing to detect with the classifier. And it saved us a lot of time, you know, from having to actually go build the model, because you could tell visually that there really wasn't any point in moving forward there. You know, a lot of times people, you know, it's always been true, right? That people complain about how much time it takes to munge the data and get it ready and just do the prep. And there's a lot of tools out there trying to address that. I do think there is value in actually spending the time and going through the data, because you often will uncover things that you wouldn't have if you skip that step or do it through a tool. So just, again, use caution when you're using some of those tools, but, you know, be sure to spend that initial time, even though it's painful sometimes, go through the data, really try to understand it. It'll help you out down the road. This is a fun example I found in the New York Times a few months ago. And the way to fail here is to look for data to prove what you have already decided to be true. And I think this probably happens more than any of us would like to admit, where, you know, somebody comes, they have the story in their head already, they have the decision made already, and they're just looking for some charts or some data to back that up. So this is actually you know, if you look on the left side here, Governor Cuomo, who was giving a press conference and talking about how in January, the positivity rates on COVID tests had dropped from just over 7% to just under 5% in a matter of a couple of weeks. And if you look at that, you think that's pretty great, right? It's heading down. That's good news. Now, if you look on the chart on the right, this is what the New York Times actually pulled together. And what you can see there is a ton of variability represented by the dashed line up and down, right? And so if you look at that, you can say, oh man, it's bouncing around a lot. And maybe a better way to look at it is what they did, is that 7-day average. And if you do it that way, it would actually tell you, hey, the drop, there's still a drop, but it's not nearly as dramatic, right? It's less than a percentage point, 6.4 down to 5.3. I'm sorry, just over a percentage point there. So it kind of changes the story a little bit on you. So, you know, what I like to advise people to do is, or as you're working with, you know, somebody in the organization, help them, guide them to this, is really come to the analysis with a hypothesis, right? Or with a question. If you come with a hypothesis, we can either prove or disprove that, right? But you have to be willing to be wrong and be willing to change your perspective there. Okay. Don't set expectations as to what will be delivered. So I think, and this probably is a little bit more of good consulting advice in general, as opposed to analytics related necessarily, but it's always good to get the expectations out on the table, right? Because I find time and time again, your client, right, your person you're partnering with, may have very, very different expectations. They could be expecting much more than you're planning to provide. They could be expecting much less as well. So just kind of a fun example here. A few years ago, my family and I were traveling. We stopped at a Wendy's in a truck stop somewhere. And I just happened to notice on the sign that they had family nuggets there, 48 to 50 pieces. And I just love the fact that they gave you a range. So you don't see that very often out in the wild, but they set my expectations, right? If I was expecting 50 and I got 48, I was not going to be happy with that. But they set my expectations that, hey, it's a lot of nuggets. It's not going to be exactly this amount. I think a lot of times I've used the trick of when I get a request of asking, hey, when do you need to make a decision, or when do you need something back? And it's really good to know if this is a 3-hour request, a 3-week request, or 3 days. It's good to know that time frame, because a lot of times somebody will say, hey, I got a meeting tomorrow. I just kind of need some directional here. And that would, lead me to a different analysis, as opposed to, hey, we're about to deploy this model in a couple months and it needs to be highly accurate, right? Those would point me to different things, but initially the requests might sound very similar. So be sure to understand expectations, get that out on the table, make sure you're both on the same page. And also too, it often helps to explain, hey, if I spend a couple hours on this, here's what I can give you. If I spend a week on it, here's what I can give you. And oftentimes they'll your client will actually help you understand, hey, I don't really need the full week thing. Let's spend 2 days on it, and that will get me exactly what I need. This is my other screenshot from, or I guess picture from the book about how to do math with bad drawings. So don't ask what the decision is going to be when the analysis or the work is done, right? It's always good to know how the information or how the model is going to be used, right? And a couple of reasons for this, right? By knowing how it's going to be used, that can help you obviously shape your work and maybe even provide better ideas, right? Or a different idea than they haven't thought of. It also helps you kind of avoid some of those questions where somebody just might be interested in something, but doesn't actually have plans to use it to make a change or make a decision. So just always try to understand, what are they going to do, right? And the reason I put this up here with, Han Solo, and that is, if you remember the quote, he's decided they're going into the asteroid field and he doesn't care what the odds are, right? They've made that decision, right? And I've certainly run into similar instances like that where, hey, the decision's made already, right? And if that's the case, do we really need to spend time on analysis or looking at data if the decision's already made, right? Or if we don't know what the decision's going to be made, or what we don't know how it's going to be used, let's solidify that a little bit before we jump off, right? We've all got plenty of things to do. So, don't spend your time when, a decision's already been made or when we haven't quantified how that decision is going to get made. All right. This is a lesson it's been hard to learn over the years for myself, but, one way to fail is tell the audience absolutely everything you did, right? I think this is a hard lesson for us as analytics people, because we want to share all the steps we took. We want to share all the paths we went down that maybe some of them didn't work out. We want to share the techniques we did. Maybe we want to share this coding trick we learned to, solve a hard problem. The truth of the matter is many leaders that you're working with really just want the answer. I used to work with a chief marketing officer, and it was so hard to get his time that I learned that, when I did get it, I really only had, a minute or two of time with him. I didn't have time to share him everything. I really just had time to convey, hey, here's the answer you're looking for, or here's the recommendation. Oftentimes I would actually just kind of find him in the hallway, because his assistant would tell me where he's going to be. He's going to be going at 3 o'clock from this meeting to this meeting, and you can catch him in here. So I had to learn to be very succinct and get the point across and then move on. So, one thing I recommend a lot of people to do is, and this is how a lot of my presentations look, is most of them are 2 to 3 slides of the key findings and recommendations, and then a really, really big appendix. And what you'll find is a lot of people, the 2 to 3 slides are exactly what they need, and they will be happy with that. They know you're the expert. They'll take your advice and move on. And then some of those who want more details, right? You're prepared because it's sitting there in the appendix, and you can go to the right slide and show them, right? And obviously you have to know your audience, right? You have to know the audience. This is not, probably not good advice if you're doing a presentation at a meetup or at a internal team meeting, right? Where, there's probably an expectation that you're going to go into the details a bit more. But I do think this is good advice and has worked well for me when presenting to leaders in your organization. One quote somebody gave me here kind of around this area that has really stuck with me is, bring your masterpiece, not the whole gallery, right? Kind of bring the 2 or 3 key things that you think are the most important, not necessarily everything. All right. Don't capture the ROI. This is something that's hard to do. It's hard to slow down and actually calculate the ROI sometimes. It's an easy step to skip, because I think for people, data scientists, analysts, it's not the funnest part, right? It's often harder to do than one would think, but it is very valuable. I saw an article several years ago titled 150 Data Scientists and Still No Value. And that has really stuck with me over the years, because if you actually go and dig into the article, one of the key points there is not that they weren't creating value, it's that they weren't necessarily quantifying it and showing it back to the organization. They were creating a ton of value, they just hadn't done the extra step to actually quantify it and put a number against it and tell that story of what it was doing for the business. So I'll just challenge you, make sure you're understanding the value of what you are doing. It is harder to think, not from a technical perspective, just from working with your business partners. It is sometimes harder to calculate than you would hope it would be, but it's very valuable to do. And you should definitely do that. So you can, because you are creating a lot of value, right? These, as analytics people, we are adding a lot of value to the organization, and, we should get credit for it, right? We should be able to tell that story. All right, just a couple more here. How to fail. Use your math language, right? Use really complicated charts. This is a chart we actually used a couple years ago. And if you'll notice there, if you look along the x-axis, the scale is log base 10, which is probably not the most intuitive thing for most people to wrap their head around. This might be a great chart for an appendix. This might be a great chart for exploring the data or validating your results, but it's probably not the best chart for presenting it to a leader. I think one thing we do need to do as analytics practitioners is we need to learn the language of the people we're working with, right? We shouldn't expect them to adjust to our language. So for example, I took over a marketing analytics team some years ago. And when I initially did that, I would often refer to myself as an analytics person. But over time, I adjusted and began to think of myself really as a marketer, right? And that was a big change, right? And I started to use the language that the rest of the marketing team would use. And I think that actually helped the team be more successful. It helped us build stronger relationships. But it was a mind shift, right? Because I went from being a marketer primarily as opposed to an analyst primarily. Next one, if you remember Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. So I think one way to fail is assume that your analytics or your new model is going to be so amazing that once you build it and show it to people, people are just going to embrace it and use it, right? And I think the truth is that, getting people to change and getting people to adjust and behave differently, right? Which, again, a lot of our analytics work and data science work, it creates change. It creates a new way of doing things. And so I think getting people to change is often just as difficult as the technical aspects of the work, if not more so. There's, I think most organizations have just, too many stories of building models or performing, creating dashboards or doing great analytics work, but it never produced value because it wasn't actually used, right? And again, the truth is, it doesn't matter how great your model is or how great your work is if it doesn't actually bring about change or a better decision. So one thing I'd encourage you to do is, spend a little bit of time learning some change management principles, right? Things like, appropriate communication strategies, getting, high-level support, things like that. If you're in a larger organization, become friends with your change management team. I think you'll be able to pick up a lot of tips from them and help from them that can help you realize the value of the work you are doing. All right, and lastly here, one way to fail, don't clarify where the finish line was at, right? So don't clarify what would be valuable to your stakeholders. And this is probably more relevant when you get into the modeling type work. And truthfully, you'll probably have to help your clients or your partners quantify this, right? Just a couple examples. We did a project recently, and I think we saw it was a single-digit increase in accuracy over what was in place today, and we were kind of disappointed with that. Didn't think it was, it wasn't that great. It wasn't, kind of that high accuracy we were aiming for, but it was an improvement over what they had today, even though by a small amount. And the client actually loved it. They thought it was great. They thought it was incredibly valuable. We're excited about the results, whereas, we weren't, right? We kind of were expecting more and didn't see the value in the small increase that was able to be provided. We've had other instances where, the client expectation, the bar was so high and with the data we had, it wasn't even achievable, right? So just as you're scoping work, as you're thinking about, the start of the project, try to figure out what's a threshold that will be valuable, right? A lot of times there's you can find that threshold to where, hey, if we don't hit this line, it might not be worth the effort, or it might not be that valuable enough to implement. But hey, when we start approaching this line and beyond it, this does become something that's really useful for the organization. It's also interesting here too that a lot of times these data science projects or predictive models, they tend to be held to a higher standard than what the people kind of maybe currently doing the job today or the current process is at. So that's one thing to explore as well, right? Is, what is the current accuracy today, right? If somebody is categorizing emails, for example, what is the current accuracy of that classification today, right? Because if that's not something that's highly accurate and you're using that as your training data, right, it's going to lead to you can only be so accurate as that training data will allow. So you may have to actually go back and do some additional labeling to make sure you have highly accurate data, but be sure to ask about that. And that's all I have. Here's a quick summary of the 10 things we talked about. I think we got time for a question or two. And thanks again for your time. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand. All right. Well, if we don't have any, thank you so much again, Brian. That was a really great presentation. And we do have one from Abish. In your experience, when you build models for large-scale projects with many features, do you find more success starting small and scaling, or do you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do like starting small. I like taking an iterative approach and beginning small and getting some momentum, right? And so I find once you start kind of get the ball rolling, you know, start with a feature or two, right? And that will allow you to build some momentum, build some confidence, build a partnership with the person you're working with, and then you can keep, you know, building on top of that and moving from there. Use the word build a ton there, unfortunately. You know, another great way here is, you know, think of pilots, right? You know, pilots are a great way to help people get comfortable with the results, especially when you're in an instance where you're, you know, say you're replacing a manual process with a, you know, an automated machine learning process, right? It's great to, you know, run those in parallel for a few months and get people comfortable with the results and use that to tweak the model. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions, folks? Okay, well, we'll wrap it up here then. I don't know, Brian, if people do have additional questions, is there a way to contact you?
Yeah,
someone just asked for your contact info, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I will put it in the chat. How about that?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for attending as well, and have a great day.